friend Douglas Vernon Gibbs, my former colleague on the radio and in Pixels at politicalpistachio.com, is a constitutional originalist. Note I don't say self-styled. I mean, he's been teaching Constitution classes for over a decade. He is self-taught. He knows more about the United States Constitution than anybody outside of the Founding Fathers themselves. He is Mr. Constitution. He is that Constitution guy. He has written several books on the United States Constitution and continues to churn them out. I mean, the radio program I used to co-host with him is called Constitution Radio. So Douglas Vernon Gibbs is a constitutional originalist, but he threw away all credibility as a constitutional originalist when he threw in with Donald Trump. I mean, Doug should have been the one to ask the following question. In fact, this should have been the only question that Doug Gibbs had to ask. Where is the evidence that Donald Trump would defend the Constitution? But Doug never asked that question, so it fell to George Will to pose it in a syndicated column this weekend. Like shipwrecked mariners clinging to a floating mast, many Republicans rationalize supporting Donald Trump because of the court. This two-word incantation means, because we care so much for the Constitution, it is supremely important to entrust to Donald Trump the making of Supreme Court nominations. Yeah, go back a year and a half and pose that same question, and you would have been swept away in gales of hysterical laughter. But now, all of a sudden, it's a serious thing to them. That's like going down for the third time and convincing yourself that you're going to suddenly grow gills. In a Republican candidates debate, Trump complained that Ted Cruz had criticized Trump's sister, Marianne Trump Berry, a partial birth abortion zealot federal appellate court judge on the Second U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals based out of Philadelphia. Trump said, "He's been criticizing my sister for signing a certain bill. You know who else signed that bill? Justice Samuel Alito, a very conservative member of the Supreme Court. But my sister signed that bill." Trump, the supposed savior of the Supreme Court, thinks federal judges sign bills. Oh, but the mast clingers say, well, sure. I don't think they don't concede even this much. They don't concede even this much. They call themselves conservative and call us traitors. They call us traitors. Never Trump. Maybe it should be the more sane, or close to sane, mast clingers say, well, sure, he knows nothing about it. Like Doug would probably say this. Sure, he knows nothing about American government, including the Constitution, which he vows to defend all the way to Article 12. There are only 7, by the way, for those of you in Malaga, Washington. He will, however, choose wise advisors and humbly defer to them. Or as Doug would put it, we're giving him the benefit of the doubt. Now, this doesn't seem quite like Trump because there's no evidence anywhere in his entire 40-plus years on the national stage of Donald Trump having anything to do with wisdom or humbly deferring to anybody. Remember, nobody controls Trump. Whatever happened to that? Oh, but the mast clingers say, don't worry. He already has compiled a list of admirable potential nominees, and stickler that he is for consistency and predictability, he will stick to this script written by strangers. This, too, does not quite seem like Trump. Now, does it? But the masked clingers say, don't worry, he has said enough to reveal what his instincts are. And indeed he has, although not in the way that they're trying to convince us or have us believe. The court's two most important decisions in this century are Kelo and Citizens United. Conservatives and constitutionalists loathe Kelo because it blatantly eviscerates the takings clause of the Fifth Amendment. And, of course, as you might have suspected, Trump loves it. He loves Kelo. He loves eminent domain, which is using the power of the state to steal property from private citizens and organizations. Conservatives celebrate Citizens United, which restored much of the original First Amendment. And Trump, as you probably already figured out, repeats the strident rhetoric of its liberal detractors, such as Hillary Clinton. Kelo did radical damage to property rights. The Constitution says private property, in the takings clause of the Fifth Amendment, says private property shall not be taken for public use without just compensation. Just compensation being defined as whatever the owner of the property decides is a fair price, and that includes the owner of the property refusing to sell. I seem to recall a Bugs Bunny cartoon along those lines, where Bugs Bunny refused to sell his hole, and they had to build a freeway around it. Not put the hole, not pave it over the top of the hole, build the freeway around the hole. I bet you never thought you'd be getting an exercise, a tutorial on constitutional law from a Bugs Bunny cartoon, but there you go. Man's house is his castle and all that. Until Kelo, the court has held, or had held, that for public use meant for public use. Something used by the general public, you know, roads, public buildings, infrastructure, or to remove blight. But in Kelo, the court held 5-4 that the government of New London, Connecticut, behaved constitutionally when it forcibly bulldozed a residential neighborhood, in other words, people's homes, people left homeless, for the public use of transferring the land to a private corporation that would pay more taxes than the neighborhood's residents paid to the government. You know, I mean, to call that a tortured, skewed twisting of the common sense definition of for public use doesn't begin to describe it. It is legalized theft, is what that was. Trump, and of course, Trump's interests as a developer and a big government authoritarian converge in his enthusiasm for Kelo. Remember, Trump loves eminent domain, which is the public seizure of private property. Loves it. He's boasted about it in the campaign. Citizens United said that Americans do not forfeit their free speech rights when they band together in corporate form to magnify their political advocacy. The court held that the First Amendment protects from government restriction independent, not coordinated with candidates' campaigns, candidate advocacy by Americans acting collectively through corporations, especially non-profit advocacy corporations such as the Sierra Club, the National Rifle Association, etc. Hillary Clinton favors amending the First Amendment. Now, notice this. Hillary Clinton favors amending the First Amendment. I'm sure if the Supreme Court, after she had packed it, or finished packing it, or even in the process of packing it, had, you know, I'm sure if they threw out or overturned Citizens United. She'd have no problem with it, but she favors amending the First Amendment through the Article 5 process, which is more than Trump can say, to empower government to regulate the quantity, content, and timing of campaign speech about the government's composition and conduct. To call that a conflict of interest doesn't begin to describe it. It would do this by regulating campaign spending, most of which funds the dissemination of speech. The rationale for this and for the broader liberal, left-wing objective of replacing private funding with public funding of politics, in other words, socialized politics, is the theory that politicians are easily bought by people like Donald Trump, and that private contributions breed quid pro quo corruption. You think Trump's not looking forward to the other side of that equation? And of course, Trump loudly voices and supports this proposition. In other words, one more position on which Donald Trump agrees with Hillary Clinton. The court has said that campaign speech regulations can be justified to combat corruption or the appearance thereof. Trump says he has made innumerable contributions to members of both parties because when you give, they do whatever the hell you want them to do. Quote, close quote. Before he decided to solicit contributors, back when he said that he was going to self-fund his campaign because he's a billionaire and nobody controls Trump, he said his wealth made him the only candidate impervious to corruption. Yeah. Remember those days? Good times, good times. It is unlikely that Trump would nominate to the court persons who believe that the First Amendment, properly construed, requires the deregulation of political speech. The masked clingers should remember that Trump's hostility to First Amendment values is apparent in his desire to loosen libel laws, thereby making it easier to sue, intimidate, and silence people who criticize people like him. Most masked clingers are properly dismayed by Barack Obama's anti-constitutional use of executive orders to implement policies Congress refuses to enact. That's a blatant violation of Article 1, Section 1 of the United States Constitution. The legislative power shall be invested in a Congress of the United States, not the president. But Donald Trump promises more executive orders. Here's a direct quote from Donald Trump. "I'm going to use them much better, and they're going to serve a much better purpose than he's done. In other words, tyranny, but for stuff we want." People say that, process is boring. What difference does it make? It makes a lot of difference because that's what makes us what we used to be. Process is everything. The Constitution is all about process for the purpose of preventing a tyranny, the very sort of tyranny that people came over to this country, came to America to escape from the old world. And now here Trumplicans are trying to inflict it on us. I mean, it's not bad enough that the Democrats are trying to inflict tyranny upon us. Now Trumplicans, Trump and his minions are trying to do it too. One-party state, remember? Remember in the previous video? So masked clingers straining to justify themselves by invoking the court are essentially saying this. Douglas v. Gibbs is essentially saying this. Granted, Trump knows nothing about current debates concerning the court's proper role. We will, however, blindly trust, that he will suddenly become deferential to others' preferences about judges, a deference that he's never shown in his entire adult life. And we will ignore his promise to continue Obama's authoritarian uses of the executive branch that will further degrade the legislative branch. We will do this because we care so very much for the Constitution. Come on, Doug. Really? You're still supporting Trump? And you call yourself a constitutionalist?